Number 1. Mary Shelley lost her virginity atop her mother's grave. Welcome to a list of the craziest things that have happened to authors. Now, I really like reading, and sometimes when I finish a nice, fine piece of literature, I like to go and look up the author to find out what kind of person they are. And sometimes, I discover a lot. So here's a list of the craziest things I've learned about authors. Now, originally this was a humble list of just 5 out there encounters, but I notice people who do one crazy thing tend to do a bunch. And if that opening line wasn't a clue enough, this video is going to be filled with a lot of raunchy stuff, so be warned. So why was Miss Shelley defiling graveyards? Well, it turns out it was actually a pretty core thing for her. Mary Shelley's mother died in childbirth, and this left a massive mark on Shelley. And to quote Olivia Rutligano, Mary didn't simply grow up without a mother, she grew up with a dead mother. In a sense, she raised herself at that grave. It used to be her safe space where she would go and read. And when she was young, because her mother had the same name as her, Mary Shelley learned how to spell her own name by tracing it from her mother's gravestone. Damn! To Mary, that grave might well have been her mother. So when Mary became infatuated with the poet Percy Shelley, it's only natural that she brought him to meet her mother. But that's not the only reason they call Mary Shelley Queen of the Goths. When Percy Shelley tragically drowned at the age of 29 while his boat got caught out in a storm at sea, he was cremated on a beach. And for some reason, his heart wouldn't burn. People speculate that because of earlier tuberculosis, it had calcified. Legend goes that Mary reached her hands into the fire and rescued bits of his heart, burning her hands in the process. She ended up keeping these calcified bits of Percy's heart with her until her death, leaving them wrapped up in some of her own poetry that she kept in her desk drawer. Damn! They call it the Romantic period for a reason. The Beatniks were a particularly zany literary movement that took off in post-war America. So I want to provide a little highlight reel, mostly focusing on William S. Burroughs. Here's what I think he's most known for. Okay, so one night he's in Mexico City with his friends and wife, and they're all drinking together. And then Burroughs takes his handgun from his bag and says to his wife, "Now it's time for our William Tell act." For those who don't know, a William Tell act is when an archer shoots an apple off of somebody's head. He then proceeds to blow her crikey brains out. It's so bad. Yes, he accidentally shot his wife in the face. And he only served like 2 weeks in Mexico before he gets bailed out by a friend, and it gets stupider. Later, he claimed that this incident was responsible for him becoming a writer. Quote, "It brought me into contact with the invader, the ugly spirit, and maneuvered me into a lifelong struggle in which I've had no choice but to write my way out." Later, he changed the story, claiming it wasn't a William Tell act gone wrong, it was that he dropped the gun and it accidentally fired into her face.
بالغلط وقعت تمي شاورما مع زيادة طحينية.
نعم.
وكمان قطعة تفاح وتقريبا 3 لتر مي. فمش عارف هل أكمل صيامي ولا أطعمني الله وسقاني.
The case gets even more silly. He goes on the run, gets legal counsel, changes the case again. It's a whole thing. But just imagine being Joan Vollmer, getting outright murdered by your husband. And then after he gets the minimum possible legal persecution, hearing him say, "Ah, I got possessed by a bad spirit, man. But actually, that's how I became a writer." Absolutely tyrannical. The Beatniks were menaces. Some other fun things this crowd got up to: inventing a new form of writing, where you take crikey, you cut up what you've written, then you rearrange it randomly. Now this is great. It reminds me of a style of cooking I invented when I was 6 years old. I remember really enjoying reading them when I was in high school, but the more I learn about them, the less I care for them. I know they say judge not lest ye be judged, but these guys are real jerks. Clarice occupies a really unique place on this list, because what's fascinating about her life isn't necessarily how insane it was more about the kinds of things people said about her. To give the briefest idea of what I mean, one of her most eminent scholars insists that there is only one correct way to read Clarice Lispector, and that is through a telepathic method in which you must become Clarice Lispector. Her work is known to affect people in ineffable and strange ways. Reading literary reviews of her the word epiphany very often comes up. Famously, a materialist, skeptic reader of hers once warned a would-be fan and said, "Be careful with Clarice. It is not literature, it is witchcraft." And yet, from a bird's eye view, her life isn't remarkably insane. She was an immigrant, a housewife, a journalist, and an author all throughout her life. But throughout all of this, she found immense, world-changing absurdities, and saw the universe in ways that people are still trying to dissect. She would do things like write about the insides of a closet for hundreds of pages, or about the existential despair a woman feels after crushing a cockroach. Which isn't to say she didn't lead an interesting life. She was a Ukrainian Jew whose family fled Jewish persecution. Her mother was severely afflicted by this transition and died shortly after. In a way, Clarice viewed her own birth as an attempt to heal her mother. Her father passed away when she was around 20 years old, so she was orphaned as she was entering adulthood. Then, at the age of 23, she publishes her first work. It is an instant success, with journalists raving about her skill. Immediately after that, she leaves Brazil, her home country. But again, I think what's more fascinating is the way that people talk about Clarice. Her voice was so hypnotic that people feared playing it on radio waves, as they were worried people might get into a trance. She was tall, beautiful, and mysterious. In a Paris Review article where the author is trying to capture the spirit of Clarice, he recounts a time he ran into her on the street, and she was just staring into a shop front full of empty mannequins. Later, the author said, "I think it was because of her affinity for the void." She was very often described as a witch. She actually got invited as a special guest to a witchcraft conference, in which her speech consisted of her saying nothing, sitting on stage reading a book that she confesses has always confused her. A book she herself has written. Needless to say, she is an extraordinarily interesting character. Lord Byron was actually a good friend of the Shelleys. He was also connected to them via Mary's stepsister, Claire Clairmont, who Byron seduced and had an illegitimate child with. Later, Byron claimed full custody of this child, took her away from her mother, and sent her to a convent in Italy for Byron sending anyone anywhere for moral development is hilarious in and of itself, as from a young age he called himself a devil. Lord Byron's antics inspired a whole literary genre of anti-hero, the Byronic hero. During a letter written in his childhood, his own mother complained that Lord Byron was afflicted by desperate love, the worst of all maladies, and this persisted throughout his life. Seriously, reading his Wikipedia page is like going through a gossip column. It is just full, and full of men and women, which wasn't very cool in England in the 19th century, leading him to have to leave England forever under threat of lynching. But before he did that, he got up to quite a bit of mischief. For instance, after being told that dogs were not allowed in his college, Cambridge, he brought a bear as a pet. And all of this just to express his hatred for college rules. Aside from messing around with colleges and animals, he was almost the king of Greece. Okay, that's mostly a joke and probably wouldn't have happened. But Lord Byron did spend the last portions of his life fighting for Greek independence against the Ottomans. He spent huge amounts of money financing this, even selling his manor in England, which is worth millions in modern money. And ultimately, whilst preparing to siege a fortress, Lord Byron grew ill and died. He became something of a folk hero in Greece because of this. There's even a suburb in Athens named after him. Ah, my dearest Dostoyevsky. Let's begin with the most famous one. In 1849, Dostoyevsky is arrested alongside a bunch of other intellectuals for associating with a group of people who were discussing very spicy, potentially anti-Tsarist topics. Naturally, he is sentenced to death. So Dostoyevsky is bound up, tied, and standing before a firing squad, awaiting the end of his life. Then, mere moments before they're to be shot, a royal messenger arrives, and Dostoyevsky is pardoned. They're spared, it's a miracle. The whole thing was a staged mock execution. But Dostoyevsky still has to do hard labor in Siberia for 4 years, and mandatory military service afterwards. But to the authors involved, this seemed like a genuine miracle. Dostoyevsky recounts this as a transformation in a letter to his brother, and it's in those Siberian labor camps that he found God and would formulate much of what would become his philosophy that would emerge through his writing. I'm so attached to this story, even though I've heard it so many times. It's just so literary. It sounds like something that was written down, but no, it really happened here on our Earth. And it makes Dostoyevsky's philosophy all the more appealing to me, because he's somebody who preached Christian ideals of universal love, and he didn't say these from a naive place. He truly saw some of the most despicable sides of humanity, and he said, love it all nonetheless. Another fascinating thing about Dostoyevsky's life is the particular kinds of seizures he had. Dostoyevsky suffered from epilepsy his entire life, but prior to experiencing a seizure, he would experience a sort of divine and profound ecstasy, where he would recount feelings of oneness with everything. For several brief moments, I feel a contentedness which is unthinkable under normal conditions and unimaginable for those who have not experienced it. At such times, I am in perfect harmony with myself and with the entire universe. Perception is so clear and so agreeable that one would give 10 years of his life, and perhaps all of it, for a few seconds of such bliss. That's really cool. It's kind of a wacky calling card. Imagine seeing the clouds part and God is smiling upon you. Then he says, a gift for you, my child. Then you get a heart attack. And that's the list. Let me know who I missed. If you think there are any other crazy author-related stories that you personally love to recount. And as I've mentioned in the edit, all of this stuff is potentially apocryphal. I've left hopefully adequate notations to clear up where there might be rumors or which ones are less certain than others. But thank you very much for watching.